Hello. We're continuing the series of videos instructing about the Archangel Wing Shawl, which is being published in Cast On magazine in the spring issue of 2021. This is Frank Jernigan, also known as Franco, the developer of Franco.com. I want to address the question of, or the issue of the change in directions, how instructions are written and how to understand these written instructions. Why did I change them? Let me start with that. When you work with short rows, and the entire design is made up of short rows, there are many instructions that look like knit X number of stitches, short row turn. Knit X number of stitches, short row turn. Knit another number of stitches, short row turn. Knit another number of stitches, short row turn. It's completely repetitive, and there's all that changes from line to line is the number of stitches to knit. So it's all extraneous text, so why not just have numbers? Now, well, one way to write the pattern would then to be, say, one number saying one direction, another number saying the other direction, another number saying the first direction, another number saying the other direction. But even with that, in order to work the pattern, you would need to count every single stitch. If I'm going to count 47 stitches, I need to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 47. I need to go back and count them again to make sure I counted the right number of stitches, and then I get to look at the next number and see now I need to knit 40 stitches. So I need to knit 40 stitches, and I start counting again. And so who wants to knit a shawl that makes you count every single stitch and then verify that count before you proceed? That was just too tedious and too impossible. So I thought there's got to be a better way to do it. So what I came up with is not that we will count stitches, but that we will number the stitches, and the instructions will tell you which stitch number to knit up to, and then turn, and then which is the next stitch to knit back down to, and knit to that one, and then turn. You don't have to count, you just have to mark the stitches so you can tell quickly what the stitch number is that you're knitting to. The way we do that is when you are casting on stitches, the first instruction says to cast on 95 stitches and place a counter marker every 10 stitches. A counter marker, there are two kinds of markers used in this pattern: counter markers and increase markers. Counter markers simply mark every 10th stitch so that you know where the stitch number X is, because if say you want stitch number 22, you find counter marker number 20 and it's 2 stitches past that, so it's 22. So you don't have to count all the way, you just find the stitch you want to count to, and then to knit to, and then you knit up to that stitch. Increase markers we'll talk about in another video, but increase markers simply mark where the increases have been done, so then you place a marker every time you do an increase, and you remove the marker every time you do a decrease, so you know that you are removing the correct marker, the correct stitch, and you're also getting back to the right number of stitches at the end of each module. Every module starts with 95 stitches on the needles and does increases and then decreases back to 95 stitches. So there are always 95 stitches on the module at the beginning of every repeat. How do the instructions then change? Well, as I said before, why put a lot of verbiage in when the only thing that changes are numbers? So if you're going to now not put in the number of stitches to knit, but the stitch number to knit to, then you knit in one direction and then you turn and you knit back in the other direction. So the stitch, the typical stitch, the simple version of the stitch, looks like this. Here we are. This is the simple version of 2 rows of stitches. This means knit to stitch number 51, and then do a German short row turn, and then knit to stitch number 60 and do a short row turn. Then knit to stitch number 52 and do a short row turn, and then knit to stitch number 59 and do a short row turn. The way these are written, the first stitch number is always done on the wrong side, and the second stitch number is knit up to the right side. So the stitches range from from 1 actually to 111. They're numbered from 1 to 111, and they're numbered that way from right to left as you view the right side of the marker of the fabric. This is the right side, and so this is after I have knitted several modules, and I am ready to start a new module. And so here on the right side, at the right side and the right end, is stitch number 1. And then there's stitch number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5. In this case, number 6 is a double stitch that is the result of a German short row turn. If you don't know how to do a German short row turn and what the double stitch is, please watch my video on German short row turns, which will also be included in this series. That stitch is worked as 1 stitch and counted as 1 stitch. So that double stitch right there is considered stitch number 6, then stitch number 7, 8, 9, and 10. The second marker, all of my counter markers are black. Just by convention, that's what I decided to do. I use the same type of marker for the increase markers, and I use all sorts of different colors of them, but the black ones are always counter markers. So the first one marks stitch number 10, the second one marks stitch number 20, the third one marks stitch number 30, and so forth, all the way up to stitch number 1, in this case number 90, right here. And then there are 5 more stitches on the needle, so that makes 95 stitches at the beginning of the module. Or on the first module, it's the number of stitches that you cast on, and you place those markers every 10 stitches. So this is the beginning of a module, and it has a stitch marker at every 10 stitches. The first stitch after the marker on the right is 1 stitch above this, what I call a decade marker. So maybe if this is marker for 50, then this stitch would be marker for 51, 52, 53, 54, 55. The double stitch is 56, 57, 58, 59. The marker below the stitch marker is the decade stitch. That's 60. So these are stitches 1 through 60. In order to knit the shawl, the simplest form of an instruction is simply 2 numbers, as I said. The first one is knit on the wrong side to stitch number 51. The second one is knit on the right side to stitch number 60. However, that's not all that happens. There are also increases and decreases that need to be done, and those create more interesting or complex forms of instruction. So let me show you that next. As I mentioned, every now and then you have to put increases as you knit, and so an instruction that includes increases looks like this. There will be a series of instructions separated by commas up to the dash that indicates where you do a German short row turn, and then it will be followed by another number or another series of instructions to the end, where you then do another German short row turn and to go back to the wrong side. So the way to interpret this is knit, work up to stitch number 54, do a make one, and then place a marker marking that made stitch, that increased stitch. Increasing does add a stitch, but it does not change the stitch count. The increased stitch is simply a not counted stitch. It's not numbered. So you simply place the increase in there and then knit to stitch number 51. You then make one again, place another marker. In this case, you hit a counter marker, and in a couple of cases in the pattern, you are told when to slip the counter marker. Most of the time you just slip them when you get to them, but a couple of times you have to indicate whether you slip the marker before or after you do an increase. And so this indicates that you do the increase, then place the marker, then slip the counter marker, then knit to stitch number 49, do another make one, place another marker, then knit to stitch number 24. That's all in the same direction on the wrong side of the fabric. You then do your short row turn and you work to stitch number 31. So that's how to interpret the patterns. Every now and then there's an instruction that simply says, like this one here, knit to stitch 5. The reason it does that is because it might be confusing if I just put the number 5 there and then followed by the word turn. The word turn means turn the work around without doing a German short row turn. So this means do a normal turn. You turn the work around and you move the yarn to the back. Occasionally I mark that the first part is the wrong side and the second part is the right side, but that's always the case when there's a dash in the middle of the row. And then finally, throughout, occasionally in the module, you will bind off stitches at one end or the other. This means you have done a turn, now you bind off 2 stitches. The turns are always done with 1 stitch left on, so you don't have to knit 2 and then slip 1 over the other. You always just knit 1 and then slip that 1 stitch that was already there over the one that you knit. In this case, you do it twice and then you knit up to stitch 10. So that's how to interpret the pattern. I guess it's time to see how it turns out in real life when you're working it.